KU, and we're being recorded. And that'll be the focus of today's talk. But before I get there, I want to move my slides. I'm not sure why this is like the most technologically challenging room to give a talk. I swear it changes every time we have a presentation. Probably because it's like the most expensive technological room we have in Dolan. Before I get started, I want to briefly thank our speakers. I'm not even going to bother with that. Thank our speakers from this semester. So I wanted to highlight, this was actually, I thought, since we've been doing this seminar for the past, say, 5 or 6 years, this has been, I think, our most diverse set of speakers. And so we had talks from SWIFT, from USED. We had Nancy Brady gave a talk, Richard Yee from the Addiction Center, Kathy Tiemann-Bork from over at Juniper Gardens, and then John gave our last talk last round or 2 weeks ago, John Colombo. I also spoke about family genetics and autism as well. And so there's really diversity in terms of where people are housed, where people are working, the disciplines, and the topics covered. So I was excited about that. I wanted to thank those speakers in particular, but it's also a theme that I wanted to thread throughout today's presentation, because that's really embedded within this Research Rising project, is that there's a heavy focus on increasing interdisciplinarity within the IDD research community at KU. What's wrong? No. This is one of the hardest things I've ever done. Okay, I'm sharing screen. You guys can applaud at that point. That's the most challenging thing I'll do for the rest of the hour, okay? So building off that, though, I mean, I thought it was an exciting semester full of talks, full of really diverse talks. I will ask everybody on Zoom, everybody here in person too, please send me nominations for talks for upcoming, for the next semester, for the spring. Feel free to nominate self, feel free to nominate colleagues, but also feel free to nominate external people. So as part of this Research Rising Award, we will have support for individuals to come in from other institutions to present, to get to know us, to get to know the work that we're doing, the labs that we have here. So please send names my way. I'd appreciate it. Okay. All right. That's the only requirement for today. All right. But the focus today is really this Research Rising project. So what I'm going to do is describe a little bit of the background for the Research Rising initiative broadly, as well as our particular proposal. I'll talk about the aims specifically, describing both short and long-term goals embedded within each of those aims. Bit of an update on progress towards these goals. It's been funded or awarded since August, I believe. And so there has been some progress along these fronts, a lot of work put in thus far, and I think we are moving forward. And I'm going to open up to question and answer and really discussion, because you all in the audience, this should be a dialogue, it should be a conversation, because we have 5 years, 4.5 years, I guess, of funding to really move things forward, and it's going to take a lot of people to do that. All right, so most of you may know about the Research Rising initiative as it was launched, as it was announced. If not, a brief sort of overview, reminder of what this actually was. So the Research Rising, I think, was announced last spring, and the competition ran into the summer. It was a multi-stage, multi-phased process. And really, it was a large endeavor put forward by Office of Research in collaboration with Endowment to conduct really a major investment, $12 million across 4 different projects. Each of these projects was intended to be interdisciplinary. And the idea was that these initiatives should focus on existing historic strengths within KU. They also should target at least one of 5 specific research areas that were highlighted. 2 of these we really aligned well with work that already was ongoing here and projects that already were developing, including focus on lifespan development, as well as a focus on science for new molecules, new medicines, new therapeutics. These were intended to be highly interdisciplinary, but also to build towards larger external funding awards or targets. In other words, these are real investments, not just to help us survive, help us build a little bit now, but to build towards larger projects, external awards that we would be competitive for. And these initiatives are supposed to help us be more competitive for those awards moving forward. And the FOA, the RFA strongly encouraged us to think big on these. So I'll discuss some of how we thought about this and how we did think big. All right, now the keyboard's working, awesome. All right. The component of building on historic strengths. We're fortunate, many of us are here because of this history, right? Because Richard Schiefelbusch back in the 1960s started building up our focus, our emphasis on conducting research to improve lives of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So we have historic strengths here, and over time, we've seen these strengths really grow. Okay, so we have a large presence in the IDD community, both in terms of research, both in terms of training next generation of scientists and practitioners and educators, as well as having a direct impact within the community. We do a lot of community-based and intervention-based research at KU. We are one of 8 institutions. This is a little bit dated, but we are one of 8 institutions in the country that currently is part of these distinct networks. That is the Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Research Center networks that are funded by NICHD. We recently recompeted for this in 2020, and we actually did not. We were not awarded, but we remain part of the network as an affiliated center. We also part of the UCED, University Centers of Excellence in Developmental Disabilities Network, that is led by Carrie Sjogren, who is here. Our Zoom screen somewhere, and in an airport, we're somewhere outside of Kansas, as well as being part of the LEND network. We have a LEND Center over at the Medical Center, headed up by Renee Jameson now. So these are 3 federally funded major awards, funding awards, that relate to research, intervention, clinical work, education around intellectual and developmental disabilities. This highlights the fact that KU does have a national presence here in this space. And so this was the strength that we really wanted to build on. And so whatever it was, spring, summer, we started developing ideas and structure for how we're actually going to build on these strengths, how we're actually going to move forward. We formed a leadership team. And that leadership team necessarily involved people that were working or interacting with these different centers, the LEND, the UCED, and the IDRIC. And then more broadly, across institutions, working with the Med Center. So real quickly, John Colombo is the director of Lifespan Institute. He's also the dean of our college. I think most of you know him, right? So he's been leading the IDRIC, though, for years. For multiple years, and he's been at the head of that. Carrie Sjogren is here. Hey, Carrie, thanks for joining. Carrie has moved her travel around just to be here, so I really appreciate that. She's been heavily involved. She's been directing the UCED for a number of years now. Carrie, John, and I worked intensely in developing a structure for this Research Rising initiative. And it was very clear from early on that we were well positioned to also satisfy another edict guideline requirement of this Research Rising initiative, and that was to form mechanisms for doing work across institutions, because we're already doing that. Peter Smith has been involved in that in the IDRIC for years as leadership over on the KU Med side of things. And then Olivia came here in 2020 within psychiatry. And we're so grateful she's here. First time I've actually met her in person after working with her for 2 years, which is really kind of funny. But fit perfectly, both in terms of where we want to go, but also bringing new expertise to our IDD research teams, specifically in genetics and biomedical informatics. And these happen to be areas where we see the field going, where we want it to grow, and where we've actually targeted significant energies within this Research Rising project. So this is our leadership team for the Research Rising, but as you'll hear more about, this really is going to be a community endeavor. That is an IDD research community endeavor. All right. So second time you're seeing the slide. I've now learned where that actually exists, right, or existed. This is an older picture, but here's the focus. This is the sort of one sentence synopsis, 2 sentence synopsis of what we wanted to do. All right, we want to enhance our international prominence in IDD research by investing in specific areas that we have, for which we have gaps, or which we see as being highly impactful, highly important for advancing understanding of, mechanistic understanding of, as well as power to develop new therapeutics within IDDs. And that is within omics more broadly, genomics specifically, and data science approaches, including informatics approaches. These happen to be aligned with priorities of NIH. It's not totally coincident, but really aligns with where we wanted our IDD research programs to go. So if folks haven't watched the TED Talk, this was part of the proposal, extensive proposal process for this particular work. I shouldn't say it, that's actually been a wonderful thing, but there's a TED Talk that John delivered that is online at that website. You can just Google Research Rising KU Colombo and see him talk about this in a very succinct way, but we have the opportunity to talk about it in more detail now. So up here, what you see are the aims that we propose, the aims that we're embarking on now within this Research Rising project. So first one, expanding the scope and the impact of the research we do at KU. And the way that we conceptualize that or thought about that is to expand what we do, to expand our impact, we needed to move into these new areas. And these new areas are the targets of 2 ongoing faculty searches right now, okay? So one in omics sciences and one in biomedical informatics. The second aim is to accelerate the existing research at KU and support the productive investigators that we do have here at KU, many of you in the audience right now. So we're doing that through new staffing hires and services that will be provided there. And I'll detail those in just a minute, but in short, targeting support with clinical participant recruitment, as well as support in the clinical characterization, assessment, and diagnosis of individuals in different studies. The last aim was a bit more broad. It included both increasing the centerness of our centers, increasing the centerness of our broader IDD research community. If you remember, I showed you the lab, I showed you, you said the IDRIC, yeah, we've been supported by all this for years at KU. We also have many labs that are more or less loosely or tightly connected to these different centers. And that's okay. And historically, that's worked pretty well. The productivity of the investigators demonstrated it's worked pretty well. But as Carrie and John and Olivia and Peter and I sort of thought about this and started talking about it, the idea is there that we could do more, right? We could be less siloed. I mean, everybody in academia has some siloness. I'm making up words as we go, but has some sense of kind of we need to do our own thing, but we can increase the crosstalk. And so we have several mechanisms that we built into actually intended to do that. It also, this third aim also is intended to support the more cross-discipline science through pilot awards, as well as to support the promising early stage, early career investigators that are here. We have really good training programs, a little bit biased in here. We have a great PhD training program, just one floor up, and 2 floor up. We have another one that focuses on child language, right? We have another one that focuses on behavioral sciences, a floor up from there. Do we retain the stars that are coming out of those different training programs? Do we train them into postdoc program? We do a postdoctoral training program now within LSI focused on IBD research. And then we want to keep those people here for longer. And there's a few people in the audience that have been part of those programs, and we hope every day they never go away. So we want to keep them here. And we have a couple mechanisms within this initiative designed to do just that. So why did we focus on, this is like the only science slide I have in this talk, but why did we focus on omics and biomedical informatics? Like, truth be told, I don't do those things. John and Carrie, that's not their areas of emphasis. Olivia's the only one that does, right? But these are areas that are critical, in our view, to really new cutting edge approaches to understanding causal pathways, identification of intellectual developmental disorders, and then developing more targeted individualized therapeutics. So there's a strong precision medicine background or backdrop to all of this. I show here a slide actually that came from Merlin Butler named Manzardo years ago now. I've shown this slide before, so I apologize if some of you have memorized it, but this just identifies something like, I think, 793 genes that have been found to be associated with autism, right? This is a schematic showing percentages of different causal mechanisms associated with autism as well. The plurality of which are inherited common gene variants, but of course there's rare de novo variants. There also are environmental factors. This is not a genetics talk. I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole, even though it'll be fun. But this is to illustrate the fact that we're talking about a behaviorally defined disorder in autism that has hundreds or thousands of different causal pathways associated. It is highly heterogeneous clinically. It is highly heterogeneous in terms of the issues and challenges that families come to us with, seeking support around. To better understand how just autism here can be crystallized potentially into subgroups, reconceptualized into different phenotypic or clinical patterns, and maybe different etiologies. There has to be expertise both in the background molecular processes that are contributing, as well as appropriate strategies to actually bring these large data sets that are needed together. So this is just autism. We're talking about IDD more broadly. Large numbers of behaviorally defined disorders, not biologically defined, behaviorally defined disorders that we know have these biological mechanisms that contribute or increase risk for or cause. Okay, how are we going to understand that? How are we going to break that down? I mean, that to me is a major question within all of IDD research that we really want to get a handle on. In short, all of our greatest competitors, I know science isn't supposed to be a competition, but let's be real, there's parts of it that are, right? Our greatest competitors within the IDD research community that are vying for IES, DoD, NIH, NSF awards, this expertise is critical to those high impact studies that are being proposed. And frankly, we're really wanting to catch up in that regard. Okay, so that's sort of the backdrop rationale for these particular areas of research. I'm going to throw some numbers at you now, and hopefully it makes people feel good. I found them impressive. So within the past 5 years, KU researchers have produced greater than 400 peer-reviewed publications related just to IBD. Total 6,000 citations. So that's pretty good stuff. 43 KU investigators spanning 17 different academic units, supported by 51 externally funded projects, averaging $22 million per year in direct costs. So those are good numbers, right? To me, they're good numbers. That's solid. That's the strength. That's the historic strength. But if you look at the breakdown of those, it's great. I mean, these are the areas. I mean, I'm not a genomic scientist or informatician either, but we don't have much in the way of these more molecular focused areas of research, programs of research, or tied into larger data science approaches related to IDDs. And so we have these strengths, but the impact of this work, the fundability of it, as well as the scope of it, really can be expanded by filling these critical research gaps. That's why we've targeted these particular faculty hires. We also wanted to accelerate progress for those of us who are already here, who are doing work, working hard. There are a number of ways that we could have gone with this particular aim or proposal, but we know that recruitment for all clinical studies is hard. And it's not just that it's hard, right? It's a tremendous amount. There are a tremendous amount of resources, time, financial resources, investment in trying to identify individuals appropriate for our studies. Okay, so we can actually advance knowledge. You got to find the people first. Feel free to raise your hand if this is just not an issue for you, because I want to know your secret then, right? The vast majority of funded studies, and this is broader than IDD, never reach their recruitment milestones. About 0.2% of patients seen clinically are ever referred into trials by physicians or nursing staff. Okay, this is, again, broader data outside of beyond IDD research. Maybe that number is higher in IDD research, but I don't think it's closer to 100 either. The point here, though, is we do have existing research registries. We do have repositories where these patients are identifiable, can potentially be contacted. In our view, these registries and repositories have not nearly been leveraged enough. Okay, and to be clear here, I don't pin that on investigators. I don't think about that as investigators. We use these research registries. We use the Heron database. People are familiar with Heron. We use it. We use it a lot, and it actually gets a lot of our participants. It's still not easy to integrate or to access or to utilize, right? We need to fix that. Okay, we've had conversations with CTSA. We've had conversations with people over in informatics about how we can do this. This funding, this initiative is intended to help us do this by hiring staff liaisons that will help with the informatics piece, the access piece, and the overall recruitment piece, including helping to get new families and new individuals and a more diverse group of individuals into these registries to support, again, specifically IDD research. Okay. Another major investment and another major target for our time in a day as investigators is ensuring that our assessment and our diagnostic designs and batteries are rigorous, are replicable, and potentially aligned with other studies. So some of us have an eye towards combining data sets longer terms to build up these larger data sets. How do we design these assessment batteries? How do we ensure that we're maintaining gold standard approaches, that we have the people and the resources to actually do, right? So for those of us, a good example, often the best example when we used it in the project here, the best example is the ADOS and ADI, right? The Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule, Autism Diagnostic Aid. They're great tools, right? I mean, they're highly reliable tools. They're very helpful in the diagnosis of autism. And they are part of our gold standard approach. Cassie, I don't know if Maggie's on the phone, Nancy's on the phone or on Zoom. Several people right now are in the process of getting their ADOS training. Okay, so pretty easy though, right, Cassie? Total sarcasm, right? So it costs a lot of its resources to get one person in who is certified to do the ADOS training. Okay, that person, not just someone is not just reliable on the ADOS, but is certified to do the actual training 5 people at a time, okay? 5 people at a time, 2 3-week sessions, or 3-day sessions, sorry, each of those 3 days is full day, right? And then after that, the reliability, which will be done in a week, I'm sure, with Cassie, but the average human is like 6 months, right? And a lot of people drop, especially if you're not reliable in that first round of videos. And that's just for the ADOS, right? And so that's a real problem. It's a real problem within the field. We're not going to necessarily fix that within this research writing project, but it does serve as a bottleneck to the field, and it does serve to limit non-affluent academic medical centers from implementing gold standard measures for diagnosing autism. It is fraught with issues. I get that. I'm totally on board with that. But the reality is, for us to use those gold standard measures, for our labs to be highly competitive, our research investigative teams to be highly competitive for these larger awards and keep pace, we need to facilitate and support that. We can't expect every lab to be doing that individually. It's just not a good use of resources. So we'll be hiring what we're kind of calling a research diagnostician or research assessment specialist, who will help align this, will help get labs trained, and will help scale our ability to actually do rigorous gold standard assessment and diagnostic approaches in IDD. Some of you in this room probably could tell me about seminars that I don't know about that would be really interesting, that I would regularly attend. As we started developing this and as I've had conversations with different individuals, you find out that actually a lot of us do have our own individual seminars that are ongoing, and they're wonderful, and they're productive, and may be involved training, may just be research sharing. Our hope is to not take that away, but to better integrate, right? So Carrie and I have had this conversation, we've talked about this. Shada Rayleigh, who's actually pictured there, that was unintentional, that works out perfectly for this moment. But there are, you said, ProSems and research seminars. I know there are over Juniper as well. And then we've been doing this KCART one for several years. We can still have all of this, but the hope is that we're all participating in each of those. Because I do think that we do very different work, but with common directions and common goals. And so the hope is that these become more integrated, and that facilitates more crosstalk, more cross-discipline work, at least learning. More concretely within this aim to facilitate that, there will be funding for pilot projects that will focus on 2 specific areas. One being targeting early career scientists. So to help facilitate preliminary data collection that builds towards an external award proposal. The other will be specifically targeting a cross-discipline project. So collaborative project that also would be building towards a larger external award proposal. Now, these awards have some flexibility as well in terms of funding, okay? So we'll be trying to gear these towards those most meritorious projects within these 2 different areas. And we do have some flexibility in terms of how much funding support will go towards each of those, okay? We want to make these actually have impact. We certainly each have seen, and they're great sometimes, but there's some smaller awards around our different institutions that it's kind of debatable whether it's worth it to propose them, whether they can, maybe give us, sometimes with our MRI studies, it's like, yes, we can propose, 1.5 subjects for this month, right? Like, that's not helpful. So we're going to try to work with both the early career investigators as well as the interdisciplinary teams to figure out what actually is going to be impactful and helpful to getting those competitive proposals out. We're also hoping for, and I don't know how I chose these, I didn't choose these pictures, but this picture just doesn't necessarily apply to it, but whatever. So that's Temple Grant. She visited our lab and now came to one of our presentations. What's that? I wasn't there. That's the best part of that picture. Was out of town. So I'll never meet him. But what we want to do though is provide also, in addition to these pilot awards, more in-depth opportunities for the early career scientists and trainees. And we'll be doing this through a grant boot camp. Okay, so the pilot projects, as well as the intensive grant writing collaborative experience. Christopher, you kind of did some of this a few years ago, performed some of this a number of years ago, outside of IBD, where you involved John. And so that was in some ways some inspiration for this kind of thing. But there are other institutions that have utilized these models, but it will be an intensive mentored, really academic year-long type of process developing on that. And so we'll start announcing the pilot awards as well as that boot camp in the spring, with competitions in late spring or summer for the fall to begin for the fall semester. So that's all I got right now. I promised updates, and I can provide a brief update, but I'll leave the aims up there, although I realize the font might be difficult to read. But I'll leave those up there to just sort of help us structure the conversation. Real quick on those updates, a lot of our efforts thus far have gone towards these faculty searches. And so both faculty positions are open. I lied earlier when I said there's two asks. I mean, there's just one ask. There actually are two. This is how, if names come to mind, or people come to mind, we're really trying to find individuals who have existing track records. And the initial announcement suggested that teams think big, and so we did in terms of faculty hires. We're looking for people that have existing track records to bring them in. We talked to a number of individuals about these positions. These are mid-career people. Several of them already have this one-on-one kind of thing, and so we're hopeful in that regard. But it's going to be a process, and it's already been significant effort. So that's good. Things are happening there. But please, again, feel free to send names, ideas, those are my way, because I hope that we're all collaborating. So that's all I have in terms of presentation. But what questions do you guys have? What thoughts do you have? What ideas do you have? And Zoom, you all are welcome to chime in too, but I had my back to you, something like this. I'm going to try to blow you up. Oh, forget it. I'm sure that would work out too.
But what are the tools or hopes for getting this information out to other people at the Med Center who might be interested or
That's a good question, actually. So at first I thought you were going towards the faculty searches, but more broadly the other opportunities and information. We try to highlight it through our LSI communications team, Jen Hunter.
Could you repeat the question? We couldn't hear it.
Oh, sorry, Nancy. Yeah. So Catherine asked what we're doing, or if we're doing anything to really disseminate this information to, say, people over at the medical center. I didn't bring it up to you, but the idea is that collaborators that we each have over at Children's Mercy also can be part of this, right? But how are we sharing this information with those individuals? And so my answer to that is that we've been doing that through Jen's newsletter. We've been trying to get word out through social media. Some of it, not through social media, but through her newsletter, she shares it in ways that when I start talking social media, I'm obviously talking beyond my expertise. But it's a good point. I mean, we can disseminate this information, make sure that people over at the Med Center do know about it. We have this list, the list that receives the invites to each of these seminars, for one thing, is rather long, and it's a small percentage of individuals, that regularly attend, and that's okay. But we can certainly expand that, and then certainly if others have different ideas for how we can actually share this information, then those would be welcome. Yeah, Jay.
Will you guys be putting out an RFP for the other projects, or are those already
Yeah.
established?
No, yeah, sorry if I didn't say that. No, in the spring, we'll be putting out an announcement and the specific details in terms of funding range, application format, and things like that. So that'll be coming in the spring, early spring.
And that will be limited to KU and investigators.
Yeah, we can include people over at Mercy and that are in pediatrics as well. But yeah, the idea is our institutions.
I have a question. I don't see the little hand raise function, so,
That's okay. I'm my background anyway, so.
okay. Do you have a timeline for when or any ballpark idea for when the centralized sort of testing service might be available? That is just going to be so great for a number of reasons.
Yeah, I agree, Nancy. And I realize now as you're talking, I probably didn't repeat Jay's question just a moment ago, though, but Jay asked about the timing of the pilot announcements, and I said that was early spring. No, in response to the timeline, thanks, Christopher. The timeline for those centralized assessment services is really going to be around when we can actually get that hiring done. So the idea is that the faculty searches were prioritized and as I indicated, begin this semester. Those hires are expected to be launched, or those searches are expected to be launched in the spring. We do, on a side note, I mean, we have an individual in mind that may or may not be movable. That would be in many ways ideal in that scenario. So we have actually already started some of those conversations, but we'll see if that can pan out. But the official search will be sometime in the spring. And I will say broadly to people involved, if individuals are wanting to be part of those searches or have input in terms of how we want to formulate, you know, the criteria and the description for those searches, that's another area where, you know, that should be collaborative so that it's actually going to be a service that meets people's needs.
I guess related to timeline, so it's a 5-year grant from the university.
Yep.
To get these up and started, right? So I just got a 3-year grant, so I'm already thinking about after this grant, what do we expect for, how are we going to continue these things?
Yeah. So it's a good question, and I probably didn't even say this, or even though I intended. So I think there's a couple questions about it there. So for Zoom people, Megan asked about looking forward, like how are we going to keep this going, and how are we going to build on it? The direct answer to like how we're going to maintain this or keep going with it, the budget model for the new staff hires would be that there would be a fee for service model developed, as well as the hope that those would be individuals that would be included on project proposals, right? So I mean, so if you have a diagnostician, a clinical person, instead of having to go hire out staff, or if you do hire staff, they can be trained with this person, but then that person or your team winds up being supported 10 whatever percentage of FTE. And so we expect then that over time, these are positions that would essentially be paid for themselves, pay back themselves. And the ideal, they would then grow, right? Rather than just these individual hires, they would grow because they're intended to actually both accelerate the pace of research and proposal competitions, but also the competitiveness of those outgoing awards. And so this is an investment that we hope to pay for itself. The other piece that I was saying that I didn't mention that I intended to, which is related to your question, is, you know, where are these awards going? So Carrie and the USAID group recently recompeted, and they are recently newly funded. I got that right, Carrie? Okay, yep. So they recently were funded. I forget how many, it's probably been a year or so since the LEND was funded again. One of the clear goals that we have as a group is to recompete for the IDRIC. So that is an absolute target. And in some ways, if we were able to successfully do that, that would support some of the costs that are being currently supported by this research right now. So there's some overlap there, and we have reason for never guarantee, no promises, whatever. But we have reason to believe that we can be really competitive for that award. The next cycle in 2024, I think, is the next competition. But we also targeted leveraging these resources to be competitive for an internal ACE proposal, and that will be in 2026, I believe. It's the next competition, 26 or 22nd. But either way, so that would be another target. And while those are more research or project specific, they bring with them significant resources that would help really support these kinds of endeavors.
I had a question about, when Catherine was talking about the Med Center connection, and then that reminds me that here at KU Lawrence, the Genomics Center also got a research rising, and I was just wondering how that relationship is gonna be built to try to strengthen like what they're doing over there. I know they have some anthropologists that do genomics. I know they're hiring more at the assistant level.
So yeah, so you didn't hear on Zoom. Olivia pointed out that one of the other research rising centers is the genomics group, the new genomics center here on campus. It's led by Rob Uncliffe. And it's actually really, they had a cool proposal but theirs was focused primarily, I can't remember if it was exclusively, but primarily around faculty hires. So they actually proposed 5 faculty hires. Like you said, more at the assistant level. So there's a little bit of a difference in terms of, expected salaries and things like that. And pretty diverse group of targets. And I don't remember how many searches they actually have ongoing now, not all 5 yet, I don't believe. But one of them is for someone with backgrounds in informatics. And the hope is that one of them may, be related to what we care about and what we do as our IDD research community. So I'm actually part of that one. I had nothing to do with it getting funded. Most of the words within that proposal were like new to me, but yeah, the hope is that there would be some collaboration with LSI and then some teaming up with our center as well. How that will actually manifest, I don't know. My hope is that we can be involved in some of the searches and potentially identify somebody who's not going to necessarily fit the bill here, part of ours, but who may be somebody who would be part of a couple of states family. I will say, one thing that we've shared with people that we've contacted about these positions is, there is an ongoing search for a new director of Juniper Gardens. There also is a search that will be initiated soon over at the Med Center for a neurobiologist who's focused on IDD. So in some ways, we've been able to time this well enough that there's potential for these hires to really be synergistic, right? And this almost becomes kind of a cluster hire, at least with some level of overlap in terms of their expertise and interest, but all of whom I would imagine would have relevance for some of these larger targets that I'm talking about. Keeping her, you said, moving, Belen moving, also potential IDRIC, potential ACE, other awards that I'm looking. All right. Feel free to ask more questions. I don't want to cut it off, but I also don't want to make you all sit here in silence. Again, I will say, I appreciate people coming to this. I appreciate people joining in from Zoom. Carrie, I didn't really give you your due in the sense that Carrie, reality, Carrie and Olivia, John and I really, work equally on all this in terms of coming up with these ideas, moving it forward. And so there's been a lot of effort. And like I said, Carrie moved around her travel schedule to be here. Olivia traveled from Kansas City to be here. So I appreciate that. If either of you want to jump in and say, Matt, you screwed this up, or you missed this, or I just want to say this, feel free, of course. But I did also want to make sure I give you a proper credit. Appreciate all your work. So
Matt,
that
this
said-
is Carrie. You did a great job. I've got a lot of background noise, so I won't stay on, but you did a great job. And, you know, I'm sure everyone knows that they can reach out to any of us if they have any additional questions or thoughts or things they want to talk more about.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. And that was the last thing I was gonna say is like, I'd like this to be a dialogue. We want this to be a dialogue, and some of this just developed rapidly and sort of moved it forward. But especially aims 2 and 3, as those take shape. We want this to be a sort of a team thing, so. Yes, send random email.
I'll just say, this is really exciting. Congratulations. Yeah. Oh, this is really.
I appreciate it.
It's very good. It's fascinating.
Thank you. Yeah, we're excited about it. We were excited for about an hour until we met with the Office of Research and they started talking about bringing in like endowment and donors and the chancellor, and it turned from like excitement to like, holy cow, like, sure. So we worked hard. All right, thanks all. Appreciate it.